I'm Leo Wood for KitGuru, and this is Corsair Obsidian 1000D. We first saw this case at Computex 2017 as Project Slate. Here we are pretty much a year later, we have the final product. It's a huge glass and aluminium tower that can accommodate dual systems, much like, frankly, the Phanteks Elite, but clearly it has a Corsair's own twist on things. But before I dive inside and start putting some components in this cavernous space, and it really can hold an awful lot of cooling hardware, we've got quite a bit of peeling to do. When I described the Obsidian 1000D as a glass and aluminium tower, that wasn't entirely straightforward, because realistically it's the two side panels that are glass and aluminium, the core chassis is steel. If I just swing open this door here on the main side and lift it off its two hinge pins and bring it round, hefty great big piece of smoked glass, two nice pieces of aluminium, solid piece of work, job done. And the same for the back door. Again, lifts away. There are two locking screws that you can install, but I've obviously removed those already. You don't need them, they're just a kind of security thing. And again, that door is symmetrical. And we're left with the large core chassis, glass front panel, top panel aluminium with a piece of glass down the middle, which is purely cosmetic. And then we can turn to the dust filters, so power supply dust filter, quite a big fella. Slides in on rails, magnets just to make it go clip into place. Here we have the front dust filter, and here we have the top, both enormous. They're not actually identical. The pattern, for one thing, is different. You have to look sort of twice just to check that, but you'll see it is the case. Also, the front one has this diamond hole in it, which lines up with the Corsair logo on the front of the case, which is certainly unusual. You would think they'd have identical filters, but no, they're not interchangeable. And then we have the chassis. Let's just turn it around a tad, give you a slightly better look inside. So it's an enormous cavernous case. If I just undo this thumb screw here and swing this locking plate around, we can slide out the two radiator carriers. You can install a pair of 480s at the front, so that's 4x120. They go side by side, and that's what we saw with the Project Slate at Computex 2017. The top is a 420, so that's 3x140s. But Corsair mentions in passing in the reviewer's guide, you can install a pair of 480s, so that'd be a total of 4 480s with accessories, some sort of mounts, clearly. But the thing is, there are no such accessories in the pack. You get a whole bunch of screws and Velcro straps and such like, but nothing to do with mounting a radiator. So what that's to do with, goodness alone knows. But clearly they're saying, just as there's space for two 480s in the front, there's space for two 480s in the roof. As to why, well, that's a different question. I mean, if you're going for overkill, I suppose why not would be the answer. And then at the back, we can put a 240 radiator. Here we have storage, as we'll see when I turn the case around. There we have a fairly hefty power supply cover because it doubles up as a Mini ITX motherboard mount for the secondary system, and a whole bunch of cable management holes. Let me just turn the case around. It is a lot lighter without the side panels. Now, the vexed question as ever about when you have a case that has a second glass panel is, what does it cover? And here you will see the answer is actually, on the face of it, very little, and that's because Corsair clearly doesn't want to have loads of cables on show. So they've come up with this sort of French door type arrangement. Doors that are held in place with these magnets, and there you will see storage and cables both. So on the doors we've got these 3 storage mounts and 3 storage mounts. There we have 5. Let's just go around. 5 drive caddies. So 3.5 and 2.5. So where to populate all those, you've obviously got heaps. And there we have a Corsair Commander Pro, which is an accessory control unit for both fans and RGB lighting. And also some thermal management. You can connect up the accessories temperature probes, and then the whole thing is read by the Link software, so you can use the software to control lights, control fans, control your cooling, and obviously the temperature inputs would be a part of that. If we look to the back of the case, so we've got the main power supply mount down the bottom. We have there the output slots for the main system. There we have the I/O for the main system. If you're installing a secondary system, so that'd be Mini ITX on that power supply cover, that will be the graphics output and the I/O will be there. So I assume, I'll find out when I get into this, that that plate, which is just screwed in place, would be removed to reveal those outputs and also the I/O. And somewhere there's going to be a location for the SFXL power supply for that secondary system. So that'll be fun to find. Up there we have the ITX button, powers that. The rest of the system is powered off the conventional front panel, which is quite a decent I/O as you'd hope. We've got 4 USB 3s, a couple of Type Cs, headset jacks, power button, reset button. Clearly what I need right now is a whole bunch of components to start populating this case and filling it up. I have a mighty pile of components and I have the outlines of a plan. Here's the idea. It's going to be dual system, one SFX, one eATX, both Intel just because, and then obviously decent graphics to back that up. The idea is that the Mini ITX system is going to be this SuperMicro Coffee Lake system with a Core i7, M.2 SSD, Vengeance RGB memory from Corsair. As it's a Corsair case, that seems the polite thing to do. For the main system, we have here ROG Rampage 6 Extreme, Core i9 18-core processor, some very fruity Dominator Platinum memory from Corsair, and another M.2 SSD. Power supplies. Corsair SF600 for the small system, Corsair AX1600i for the big system. 4,000 and something pounds so far at a guess. Pair of D5 pumps, pair of reservoirs. I'm thinking dual loop, I'm thinking one loop per system just because otherwise it's going to be crazy crackers getting the components inside. We'll have to see how that one works. For radiators, I've got a bunch of copper goodness from Alphacool. I've got a stack more behind me as well. But the ones I've selected for the time being are 240 for the rear, a 420 for the roof, a pair of 480s for the front. I'll be interested to see whether they actually go in simultaneously. I mean, quite clearly, I don't need that much cooling. It's to fill the case. I've got to do something with all that space. That's approximately what I'm going to do. We'll have to see how that one, how that works after the first brush with the enemy. And then a pair of Alphacool CPU blocks. We've got to pretty the whole thing up. So in addition to the Commander Pro that's in the case, nearly dropped that, 2 more Commander Pros just in case. Let's have some lighting. Let's have some Node Pro, Node Pro, Node Pro, and extension kits. And then let's have some fans. So that's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 120s, and that kit's actually only 2 140s for the roof. I have to find probably a non-RGB 140 just to finish off that top radiator. And then we've got there some brand new GPX blocks that have come in from Alphacool. There are actually 4 blocks here. A combination of, or a variety of black and clear blocks for GTX 1080 Ti and for Vega 64. The final piece of the puzzle is graphics cards, of course. So we've got, oh yeah, that happened. Happily, I've just received, literally today, this box from eVGA. Which is a replacement 1080 Ti. I've no idea what went wrong with that previous 1080 Ti, but something certainly did. So we've got a pair of 1080 Ti's, and we've got a Sapphire Vega 64. That should keep me out of mischief. Obviously, in addition to that, I need all the fixtures and fittings for the liquid cooling system. There's going to be a bunch of other bits and pieces. Some of this stuff is going to be used. Some of it's probably going to go back on the shelf. But we have a plan. Right, let's put some CPUs in motherboards. So let's start with the Rampage 6 Extreme motherboard and the 18-core Core i9. Rampage 6 Extreme Core i9 CPU goes in the usual style. Give myself some slightly better access. Okay. Corsair Platinum DDR4. This is the 3466. Hooray! Special edition with extra tough packaging. Oh wow, we get to do peel. And like a box of chocolates, there's a second layer to the memory. This is some over-the-top packaging. Wowza. Right, so that's the processor and the memory installed. And now let's put the SSD in place. That weighs a lot. SSD is going to be under this cover. Another screw? No, no other screw. Right. SSD slot there. I was halfway expecting another slot up higher. Not a problem, but I do need... Oh, there's a fixing screw. Okay, put the cover back on. And there we go, that's the main motherboard with its memory, processor and SSD all in place. For the secondary system, we're using this SuperMicro Mini ITX board. Open the box the right way around. Now that's sealed. And we're going to put the coffee lake in this. And the Corsair Vengeance RGB, we've only got 2 slots, so we're only using half the kit. I've no idea yet whether this memory will actually have clearance inside the case, but I'm hoping it does. It's a very large case. and the M.2 SSD. System number 2. Here are the guts of my 2 systems, and I need a CPU block for each of them, both from Alphacool. These are XPX ice blocks. I think I may well go for the clear on the Mini ITX and that frosted look on the main system. That works for me. I'm liking the look of that. That's stage 1. Let's face it, that's the quick and easy part. Now it's time to actually put some hardware inside the 1000D. Let's start by taking off the doors. And let's investigate these covers here, which, yeah, they come off. Good. Okay, so they just lift off the hinges. Seem to be symmetrical. And what have we got going on at the back cover? Let's take the filters out, I suppose. Although in fairness, because they're magnetic, I don't think there's the usual trick where you tip the case over and the filters just drop out. Still, don't need them. Let's get them out of the way. Anything else to remove? Leave the caddies in place. Nothing to worry about there. Let's spin this round. Right, what's this cover do here? Pump mount, I guess. Pump mount base. Be about right. We'll leave the radiator racks in place. Interested to see what's going on here. That gives us access to the Mini ITX I/O, and the graphics output for the I/O and the regular doohickey. Means we can slide a power supply. Not even quite sure, apart from blanking off the Mini ITX. Right, well then that would appear to be redundant. That's the 4 screws from that, but I guess that will end up back in place. Oh, right, okay, main power supply cover. Okay. Oh, right, there's a corresponding, so 1 screw there. And that will be the corresponding screw. And that should free off the main power supply cover, I hope. Okay, so regular bit of stamped steel, and what that says to me is that this is a big case, but once you get below the surface, frankly, it's quite normal. The SFX power supply housing is here, and I'm going to use this SF600, which I believe is a regular SFX power supply rather than SFX 600L, so I should have plenty of space. Let's find my way into the box. I'm powering a Mini ITX board on the back, which is going to have one proper graphics card, so in terms of connectors and such like, I should need the absolute bare minimum, because where's the knife? Bit of storage on the other hand, but really shouldn't need that much. But once the power supply's in, I should be able to add more cables if required, so this shouldn't be too dramatic. You may or may not be familiar with SFX. Statement of the obvious, it's small. Look at that, just like a regular ATX power supply, only teeny tiny. What's the sticker say? Silent operator. Oh right, yeah, that's just the sticker to warn you that when the power supply is running at low draw, the fan doesn't operate, which is another way of saying don't panic if the fan doesn't rotate. Cable ties, screws to mount, main power cable, regular kettle cord. These will be the cables for the modular. It's obviously fully modular, despite the fact it's a teeny tiny SFX. Right, fighting my way inside. And what options do we have? So main power cable, obviously going to need that. Put those in simultaneously, that'll do the trick. Okay, main power. Graphics 1. Graphics 2, better safe than sorry. Twist it the right way. What else? SATA, Molex. I cannot think I'm going to need Molex for anything. The Corsair Commander Pro is SATA powered. I cannot see that the Molex has any use to me whatsoever. And then that's the EPS there. That's EPS, 12 volt for CPU. So that's 8-pin both end, CPU end, so that should be PSU end. It does actually say CPU, so that goes to the PSU. So the only connector not used is for the 4-pin Molex, because I just don't need that. Where's that sticky label I removed? Oh, there. Let's just clean that. Not actually sure at the moment if that's going to be on show or not, but start as we mean to go on. Bit of alcohol, not that type. What the heck has Corsair used to stick that label on? Okay, one of those days already. Little plastic scraper. Wow, that's some glue. All good fun, right, and I guess this mounts with the fans out rather than, that wouldn't make any sense, so we have to do it with the, like so. Let's put the cap back on the alcohol, we don't need that. 4 mounting screws. Powered by Corsair, little logo. Might have to find somewhere to put that. Sort of 2 rubber grommets below it, which I guess are cushions of a sort. They don't squish very far, so I have to lean down a tad. And for the main power supply, we have this mighty AX1600i. Going to go on the other side, but just for a giggle, let's see how it compares to the SF600. Well, we've got a roll of cables, which is twice the size of the power supply. We've got some stickers or faceplates or something with AX1600i logos on, and a manual. So general stuff. And we've got the PSU itself, cable ties, and bits and pieces. There's the main power supply. Which actually, humorously, is about the same size as the roll of cables. So for comparison, once again, another of these stickers that warns you that the fan, that one comes off neatly, thank goodness. Clean, and that's the AX1600i as per, and there we have it in comparison, at least twice, maybe 3 times the volume of the SF600. Right, let's connect up the various cables, and then we'll spin it around and stick it in. Bunch of Velcro straps. What are we going to put on this? So we've got the power for the motherboard. We've got 2 graphics cards, so 4 connectors. We've got EPS ×2. We've got SATA. I think that's all we need. Oh, look at that. roller cables all labelled. Oh, and USB floppy. It's an AX1600i, so we need the link cable, don't we? Yes, we need link, which is that USB connection there. Don't think we need the floppies though for anything. So that's the link cable. Still micro USB, old school, not, hang on, that's mini USB, isn't it? So it's not even micro, let alone type C. Just a thought. And let's go from the big end moving down. So that's the 24 pin. Obviously this is a fully modular power supply, so you have to insert the whole shooting match. Which is like a repeat with the SF600, only more so. Statement of the obvious, but it's critical to make sure the cables are actually inserted correctly. If you think you've installed a cable but it's not quite home, problems lie ahead. Okay, one of the EPS connectors, so that goes to the power supply and that's the CPU end. Okay, those are the peripherals. This is the heavy duty end. And another. I think the Asus ROG motherboard requires 2 of these. Well, can use 2 of these. But just to be on the safe side, you can always rip them out later if you feel the urge. PCI Express, these look like single-headed cables. Okay, they are, so it's a 6+2, but it's not double-headed, so I'm going to need 2 of these per graphics card. One. Two. That's also graphics, right? Oh, other way up. There we go. Latches in. 1. And 2. And then we want some SATA power. How many SATA connections per cable? We're going to be adding a bunch of storage to this build. I'll show you some storage in a moment, actually. Right, these are 1, 2, 3, 4 per cable. Plus I've got a power Commander Pro, so let's put 2 of these in. One. My goodness, how many have we got? We've got in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that's enough to power 20 SATA devices. You should think about it, I've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all right, 11 plus Commander Pro, 4 per, actually that's 3, all right, I'm gonna go for 3. And if I don't need them, I can always unplug them. You can generally unplug cables more easily than you can plug them, depending on what access is like, although I think here it shouldn't be too bad, albeit that power supply cover, once it's in place, I don't want to take that off. Does that want to go in there, Nick? Whoops. Does that want to go in neatly, or is that resisting? Oh, that's because it's an 8-pin, right, okay. Peripheral down there, right, done. Pick up all the twisty ties. And spin the chassis round and put this in place. nothing to clean up. It's nice and fresh. Okay, so installation, simple matter of put PSU in, screw it home, and let's put it so we're drawing air in through the filter, which means that, oh, there's a little piece of peel. There we go. So rest that in place. Four screws. I seem to recall the AX series, I think they have possibly different mounting screws. Look conventional. Couldn't remember if they're a tad longer than the regular, in which case you certainly want to use the correct ones, but nah, they look normal. Okay, 4 screws. Okay, we've got, got rubber pads, hard rubber pads below the power supply. So I have to just push down just to get the screws engaged. That one's a tad out of line, slacken them off, push it over. Okay, so where's that cabling all go? So if we take the cables and the I/O panels out of the way for the moment, here we have the main juice, which is all going to have to go through the back. So through here really. That's all drives. We don't want it in the, I mean, it's under a cover here, so that's okay. But main motherboard here, we want the cables to go through there. Okay. And as the power supply cover is also the mount for the Mini ITX system, let's put that back in place. If we can remember how that goes. Oh, it's a slide and then slide, and then 2 thumb screws, one there and one on the back. Time to install the motherboards. The 1000D comes with standoffs already installed. We don't need these standoffs outside of the ATX area, so let's just get these out of the way. Curiously enough, even though you get a massive number of accessories with the case, as you'd expect with a case like this, so a great big bag of screws, great big bag of fan screws, and more. As far as I can see, there's no tool for removing standoffs, which you get with any number of cases. Almost dropped through. Albeit generally the tool is for installing standoffs. Nonetheless, I don't like having spare standoffs installed just in case they're short against the underside of the motherboard. Okay, so there's one of them's dropped in there. It's on the mat underneath. And we have the motherboard ready to go. So this is the Asus with the Core i9 processor. So it has a fixed I/O shield, so we don't have to Put the IO shield in the case, and there we go. Make sure that's lined up. There's one of those, I'll show that actually. That standoff there has a sort of a cone on it, a point, which means that it doesn't take a screw, but you use it just to locate the board when you put it in place. So you push it home, drop it in place, and that's now fixed. Just going to run the screws into place, and then I'll point out that it's got a different SSD to when I showed this board and showing the basic components. Can't remember, I think I was going to use a Samsung SSD. But actually, I've now... Oh, hang on. What's going on here? Is that standoff is in the correct place? Good. Trouble looking down the centre of a standoff looks like you're looking at fresh air, because of course it's a hole. Yeah, the SSD here is a 1TB WD black. I was sent a bunch of WD drives. There are the packages. That one is... Which one's which? One's 500 and one's... Oh, 500 gig, 1TB. The 1TB's there, and the 500 gig is in the Mini ITX board there. Ba-bum. Very nice too. So I'll just put the motherboard screws in place, and then I'll pop the SSD cover back. That's all the screws snugged down, then put the cosmetic cover back in place over the SSD. There's that, and now it's time for the Mini ITX, which goes there. Let's just stand the case up. And see if we can find, there we go. For the Mini ITX build, we need to put the IO shield in place in the usual way. Get it the right way up. Play harder, apparently. There we go. I think it's an instruction. So that slips in like so. Okay, that's interesting. What's that lip there? It's resisting. Trying to have to, and then motherboard goes in. So as I said, that's got the WD SSD in there as well. 4 standoffs for Mini ITX. I think it's one of those situations where the wise man would have put the Mini ITX in first because the screws are now shrouded by the motherboard. Okay, let's try it. Let's use a slimmer screwdriver. So these are obviously going to be easy peasy. That's not the question. Didn't seem to want to engage, and that was the most crystal clear, easy access one. Oh, goodness, this doesn't bode well. Okay, 4 screws, 4 problems. Right, let's see. That's fine, that's happy. Magnet. Success. So the moral of this tale is you can either plan things and do that first, which is nice and easy, or you can put the ATX board in and then do that, and you have to muck around with this sort of stuff. So plan ahead. I'm going to dive in and do a bit of cable management. So we've got these cables coming from the front I/O panel. They are mainly going to go to the main Core i9 system. We've also got these front panel headers which are going to this rear panel, which is simply a power button, reset button, and judging by the fact that we've got their power LED connectors, I guess that button is illuminated. So they're coming out there, they're going to be connecting to the Mini ITX. And then we've got these great big armfuls of spaghetti from the two power supplies that have to feed through the various cable management holes, and there are many of them, 6 there, plus we've got others there which will feed up and around to connect to the 2 motherboards. So that's just the preliminary steps. Once I've got the basics connected up, just to make sure there's no howling problem, then I can start worrying about the cooling system, but also the fans. And there are going to be a lot of fans, therefore a lot of cables. So this is just the starting point. In the spirit of openness, I'm just going to say that since the last clip, I suddenly remembered I did need Molex power to power the 2 D5 pumps I'm going to be using. So I've added some more cables to power supplies. At this stage that's quite easy, but later in the game that might be complicated. So this was definitely the time to have a little think and just get my ducks in a row. So now cable management time. Even this mighty motherboard only has one USB Gen 2 connector, so this is not going to find a home. SuperMicro, the front panel headers, has a slightly unusual layout. Generally the pins go across like that. Here we've got a great big block and the power and reset buttons are at the end and they go that away. There are times you need to refer to your manual. Quite a lot of tidying up to do here, and as I said before, this is just the initial stages. But an observation about this case is that I'm not impressed by the access to the main power supply. This cutout here, if you have a full-length power supply, the power supply is projecting in there, and you've got essentially minimal access to the connection. So you have to make all your connections before you install the power supply, which in turn means you have to do it before you put the Mini ITX motherboard in place. So if you have any change of heart about anything, that's awkward. And the thing is that the 12 volt EPS connectors for the motherboard, which only go to the top of the motherboard, they've got a long run. It's a tall case. Therefore, the connectors need to be on this side of the power supply. If they're on that side of the power supply, they're traveling across the width of the power supply, you may well have problems. So a little bit of planning involved, that's okay. But if you get it wrong, to rectify, awkward, unnecessarily so. I would have thought there was scope for opening up access to the power supply to a certain extent, but hey ho. Right, time to use cable ties and do some tidying, secure things, get rid of all these various little twisty ties and such like, and make it a tad neater. I'll say this, there are plenty of cable tie anchor points. Must confess, at this stage in the game, I'm not really thinking about where these sort of French doors are going to go to cover everything over. And I'm probably going to have to unplug and replug various connections because that's always the way of these things. And I know I've got a whole bunch of fan connections coming. But for the time being, this is a case of tidying things up, making sure that everything can reach where it needs to reach to, give myself a bit of space for the next stages, because this is not going to be the finished thing. This is just a work in progress. It's really also a question of wasting as little time as possible because there are going to be mistakes. The positioning of the Commander Pro is a little bit peculiar. The power supply, the main power supply, has to be down here. That's a given. Therefore, the cables are going to come out of here, or conceivably here if you fed them up and through, but it's here. They're coming out there. Your motherboard is here. The 12 volt EPS is going to be here. Therefore, these cables are going to run there. That's directly over the Commander Pro. Now, I'm not clear in my own mind if that is, I don't know if that's a problem as such. It might actually be really smart cable space management by Corsair, because it's quite a deep compartment we have to work with, and once you've got the doors over, I'm sure it'll all be hidden from view. There's just a part of me that kind of wishes these big cables weren't running over the Commander Pro, but perhaps I'm just being a little bit finicky. I had a change of plan with my Mini ITX graphics. I was originally going to use the Vega 64 card, which happens to be a 2.5 slot card. There's only space for a dual slot card on the vertical mount. So I've switched over to a liquid cooled GTX 1080, therefore, which happens, it's an MSI Aero GTX 1080. It's already got the water block on it because it's one I've actually been using in my previous PC, and has a single 8-pin connector, which means I do not need that second connector. So I might just as well remove it. Let's face it, if I ever need to add it back in for some reason, dead easy to do. Okay, so a whole bunch of SATA power, which may or may not be necessary, some Molex power, which as previously stated I am going to require for my D5 pump, well, pumps plural. So all of that, which for the moment I'm just going to stash where the drive caddies go. That is the second USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type C. I'm expecting to mount pumps in this area here, and that's going to be kind of visible-ish from the other side, so I'd quite like to lose this. Let's just lose that USB cable there. And that's the SATA and the Molex for the SFX system from the back. Let's just stash those under here, just so there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that they are from that. This is the power for the lower graphics card. Do we have an anchor? Oh, hang on, there's a twisty tie in there. Damn it. Oh, I see. That's that single solitary RGB cable coming from the front. Right, so I don't know exactly how much slack I'm going to need on those graphics connectors, graphics power connectors there, but they are going to be going side by side, so I can anchor these two together. Okay, I mean, not beautiful, but at least it's kind of under control, and hopefully everything's going to be in the right place. Can't see any obvious glaring faults. Oh, let's secure that up the top there. Who knows, perhaps you have actually seen something daft I've done. You're going, that's going to bite him on the backside later, in which case, fair enough. Okay, I think I'm just going to put the little French doors on just to actually, I mean, I'm sure it'll cover it all, but just in case there's something I'm completely missing. Oh yes, I'd forgotten these of course double up as the SSD mounts, so cables will have to feed through, I guess. They look symmetrical, so thumb screws are on the inner face. I think that's just a grab and pull. Okay, so I've got the option of having the 3 bays up or down. Don't think that makes much difference. Magnets. Okay. Oh. All right, so that is the same part, right? The same part with the square hole. So then when you flip this on this side, all right, the SSDs are at the same height. They thought that through, but these are kind of on the diagonal. Doesn't make any difference, just not handed. And right, so at the moment, those doors cover everything, which is good. That's exactly how it ought to be. And behind the scenes, it's not looking too shocking. Do I want to leave those doors on? I'll take them off because I'm going to have to lay the case down at some point, no doubt, and I don't really want these thumb screws digging in. So let's take those off again. Time to start putting in the big bits and pieces of the cooling system. I'm going to use a pair of 480 Alphacool radiators at the front. just look at that, they just vanish in there. So one there, one there. That's 4x120 obviously, so I'm going to stick on these LL120 RGB fans. So that's a total of 8 fans at the front. I was thinking about the top, I was going to use a 420 radiator. I've got an Alphacool over there on the shelf. But connecting the radiator into the cooling system, I'm going to have the rads mounted with the unions at the bottom. These aren't crossflow rads, they have both unions at the same end. Crossflow has one at the bottom, one, well, diagonally, but that also makes the radiator slightly oversized. So if, for example, you could flow from that point there and out there and then connect. In this instance, if both unions are at the bottom, connecting to a radiator at the top or indeed at the back suddenly becomes rather complicated. So for the time being, for simplicity's sake, relatively speaking, I'm going for a pair of 480s, one there, unions at the bottom. I'm not going to put a radiator in the top, I'm going to put fans at the top, and I'm not going to put a radiator at the rear, I'm going to put fans at the rear. We shall see how it goes. I mean, let's face it, a 480 rad, that's going to cool the hardware, that isn't the issue. So let's just put the radiators out of the way. So for the moment, I want 8 120 fans for the front and 2 120 fans for the rear, so that's 10 of them. So that's a total of 12 there, 4 boxes of 3. And I'm going to use 3 140s in the roof. That pack there is 2. So I'm going to put in a Corsair ML, which is just a white. I don't think it's going to look colossally out of place. If it does, I might have to get another of these just to kind of make it all look right. So next thing is to get all those fans unpacked and then install fans and rads in the front. RGB fans. When we slide out the radiator rack, there's this little label here pointing to this kind of black triggery thing. So we flick that way, flick that way, like so, which makes it considerably easier to install the fans and the radiators. I'm going to mount the fans in push, so we'll have them outside the radiator, like so, which means I have the inner faces of the radiators free to use, as I will very likely mount the pumps to the radiators, and it's just easier to have the mounts available for the brackets. So take 4 fans now. They've each got these dual connectors, so you've got one regular PWM connector to control the fan itself, and you've got one lighting connector. They connect to the Commander Pro or indeed to the sort of breakout boxes to do the lighting system, but the Commander Pro, and they are sequential, so you connect fans 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the lighting sequence works in that order. So were I to put them on here as in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then connect them up 1, 3, 4, 5 or some sort, then the lighting pattern would be disrupted. So I need to know which is which. So if I designate top down 1, 2, 3, 4, and one side is going to be for the main system, one side's going to be for the Mini ITX. So essentially 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 secondary. Probably best to label them 1 to 4, 5 to 8. Goodness, that was long-winded. Right, 4 120 fans. Let's just see if they spin. Good. So, half a chance that's all going to work. A little bit fiddly, but all quite doable. Let's do the same again with the other side. Right, let's try sliding this assembly of fans and radiators onto these rails to see if it all locks into place nicely. Whew. That felt iffy for a moment, but once it actually goes home and everything lines up, yep, that's solid. Next up we have the three 140s going in the roof. Just the standard core self-tappers going into the fan frame, nothing special here. With the upper fans, obviously, I want the cables both for the fans and also for the lighting to exit to the rear, so they are closer to the motherboard. With the front fans, the radiator on the back side, as it were, the fans there have the cables exiting that side. With the radiator this side and these cables, I was in two minds. I could have had them exiting sort of in the middle and going down, but the thing is that the upper one's actually quite a long reach just to get to the bottom, and I didn't want to risk having the connections because they're going to have to use extensions. I didn't want to have connections sort of in the middle and then, you know, out of sight. So they're trailing down here, which might potentially be unsightly. Obviously I'm going to have to secure them. But once the side panel is on the glass, it's got an aluminium sort of front. This part should be cosmetically covered. Otherwise I'm going to have to come up with something clever to do with those. And that's fine. And then we have the wrong one, the non-RGB. The more I look at it, the more I think I might have to get another RGB one. We shall see. I may have let the side down here. So this one, just the one connection, just the PWM connection, no lighting connection. 3 140 exhausts and two more 120 RGBs in the rear of the case. Okay, that's stage 4. I'm annoyed with myself. I've started to tidy the cables for the fans and sort out the lighting for them and such like, and then I've realised I've made a fundamental mistake. I should have put the radiators the other way up with the unions at the top. I thought having them down the bottom would be tidier, and then I've realised that this whole drive mount arrangement here is just completely in the way. I can come around the side and do stuff and so on, but it means coming around, going up and I'm wrong. I should have realised this in the first place. mean, that's what happens. That's what happens when you have 8 fans, each with RGB and a fan connector. You just get a load of cables. Object of the exercise is to release all the screws so the radiator is free, but leave the screws going through the mount and through the fans so that I can hopefully lift it up, rotate the radiator, drop it back, and everything will be more or less in place. And then once I fiddle the first few screws into place, hopefully the rest will follow. As I say it, I can hear how unlikely that sounds. We're going to have an outbreak of common sense. We're going to secure fans, each of the fans, with a couple of the standard core self-tappers. And now the trick is to line up 1 or 2 screw holes and then everything else ought to follow. That's 2 screws on each of the 4 fans in place, and now if I take out the self tappers and replace those with the through screws, all being well, that's 1 radiator done without too much drama. Obviously, common sense, good practice is that you initially just get each of the screws in place, get them engaged, nip them up, and then maybe do a final tighten. Tightening 1 or even 2 before they're all in place just leads to problems, and when you've got your female threads in your copper radiator, you really don't want to go wrenching threads. Aluminium radiator, even worse, but in this instance you do not want to sacrifice the female threads. Hello. No, I am, but it's just a... Oh, lovely. Lovely. Approximately how long? Oh, yeah, terrific. That radiator should now be reversed. Why didn't I do that in the first place? Okay, and now same again with this side. Yep, cable's all looking good. And obviously the thing to do is to make sure, apart from the us, is I don't trap any cables, because that would just be a bad day out. Oh, yep. Always check your fans rotate. And now reverse the second rad. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but if you're looking to find a female thread, if you look down the hole, you can't really see a great deal. If you lift up like so and shine the light under, in this instance the fan above the radiator, you can see it really easily. And then you should just drop the screw straight down once it's all lined up. Much easier. With those two in place, there's a reasonable chance the rest is either in line or close. So a little bit of jinking along the way. Right, well that was fun. And now we have the same setup, just the radiator's the right blooming way up. God, what a waste of time. Still a lot easier doing it with everything in this state rather than when it's all wet and has to be disconnected and moved around. That would be bad. Getting to this stage has been laborious but relatively straightforward. This power supply goes here, that power supply goes there, that motherboard goes there, that motherboard goes there. Not that many decisions to take. Which radiators go where? That's been a slightly different story. That 480 was always a natural choice. Putting that 480 next to it was just to make it kind of symmetrical and parallel. But the location of that radiator there, I'm not impressed. This sort of rear cabinet where all the cables go in behind, so when you look from that side it's neat and tidy. When you look from this side, that's a solid chunk of steel. and it's really angular and it overshadows this radiator. Access to that rad once it's in place, not great. I'm still actually not quite clear what that lighting connector is about, but still I'm sure at some point when I get to turn it on we'll see what works and what does not. I'll find out what the heck that's about. Never mind. So quite clearly I have the option of mounting pump reservoir to this rad, and that's what I'm going to do. And perhaps my voice is indicating I'm not certain about this, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go for this D5 pump on the EKW bracket there, to that location there. Going to go for that EK res on that bracket there. Obviously the two need to be connected together by a vertical pipe. So far so good. I mean, quite clearly I could have gone for a combined pump res unit. I just wanted to give myself a little bit of flexibility with how things go together, because I knew this is going to get a bit iffy at this stage, as I don't really have the option of putting a second unit there. This D5 is a Vario, so you got a rotary controller 1 to 5. I put it at 2.5. Always good fun when you forget to turn your pump up and you leave it down at 1, and then when you fire the system up you find there's no flow. That's always hysterical. That D5 there is also a Vario. It's got a PWM control. Sorry, it's got a tacho connection, so it monitors speed. It's basically the same model, but subtly different. Monitoring the speed is neither here nor there. That I'm going to mount on this removable bracket that Corsair has included. That plate that sits on top of the drives. So far that is one of the few things that's making life easier on this side of things. And then a second res, same as that, which I'm going to mount to these holes here. Put that up there. And this res, that pump, that rad are going to be in one loop. So I think common sense says they're going to go to the big system up top, the Core i9, and that means by default that this radiator reservoir pump is then going to come along and go to this system at the front. I haven't got things crossing there and doing anything too horrendous. Then of course the trick is to actually A, make it work in terms of coolant flow, and B, make it look halfway reasonable. Gonna have a battle on my hands, I think, but still, here we go, installing pumps and reservoirs. I think a moment ago I was actually holding that pump the other way around. D5's, that is the intake and that is the outlet. You can obviously rotate it, it's a round thing after all, but that is where the flow needs to go in. So quite clearly connecting that to that is easier than having to go around the houses. So while I was doing that, I don't really know. Quite a reach around this case, having one arm on one side or one hand on one side and one hand on the other. looks okay. And now mounting the brackets up on the rad. So as mentioned before, Alphacool supplies you with 30 and 35mm screws for mounting fans. Well, as there, so when you've got a sandwich, so the screw goes through the chassis, through the fan, into the rad, depending on the thickness of the fan, you either use 30 or 35. If you are mounting brackets directly to your radiator, they also supply a bag of small screws. If you're mounting the rad directly to the chassis, or indeed if you're mounting brackets to the rad, you get a bunch of these small screws which come in handy. Always make sure you use the correct fasteners for your rad to avoid mullering the threads. Let's see where that goes in terms of alignment. That looks okay by eye. Always the final screw's the fiddly one. That's why you leave it till last. It's like having your keys in the final pocket you check. Less awful than it looked. It's graphics time. I'm sticking with NVIDIA graphics for this build for no particular reason except for the fact we have the hardware and it's all good stuff, and the blocks I have ought, fingers crossed, to work nicely with the graphics cards I have. So here I have a GTX 1080 that's been in my previous PC for some while before I used it for benchmarking. That is an MSI Aero, but it's a reference GTX 1080, and that has on it an Alphacool water block, which is the Alphacool Nexus GPX. Great big thin lump of aluminium. No windows, nothing glorious to look at. Works very nicely, however, and it tells you what it is on the end there. And then I've got two eVGA GTX 1080 Ti's. These are the SCs. So apart from the fact they have eVGA's own coolers, which are pretty good coolers, but the PCB is reference design. And I have a pair of brand new Alphacool Ice Block GPX-Ns, these here, which we can agree look distinctly more swish than the original Alphacool blocks. These have been in the pipeline for ages. I think I saw a CAD drawing of this at least 18 months ago. But here we are. So I've got two of those. I've got two 1080 Ti's and the 1080, which is going to go on the Mini ITX build. That is already done, and that's out of the way. So now it's time to put the blocks on these graphics cards. Camera in close. What we have is my GTX 1080 with the original Alphacool block. That's the GPX-N block. Here we have the first of my 1080 Ti's that I've already put the new ice block on. Looks certainly much more swish. And here we have the second GTX 1080 Ti, which is going to be dressed up in the second block. Now I have to say, the first time round I was struggling a little bit because the instructions do follow logic once you get into the Alphacool way of doing things. So hopefully this second block is going to be slightly more informative for you and a little bit less of me sort of sitting there going, what the heck do the instructions say? Now you do get a reasonable instruction guide with a kit list, reasonable diagrams. You can follow the guide, but as with all these things, once you've done it once, it makes a heck of a sight more sense the second time round. So the first thing is to prepare your block. Take a screwdriver. Make sure you've got the right. Okay, so that's the windowed side there. Go to the back. Undo the 4 screws that hold on the back plate. Like so. Pull off the back plate like so. It's just a piece of stamped aluminium, and inside you've got the block along with this sort of shroud essentially, and an RGB cable, and you've got these 4 plastic spacers that you have to remove. Now it's early days with the basically they're packing pieces. The first batch of these blocks that's come through, quite clearly Alphacool's been using them for R&D purposes, having a look at them to check for quality and such like, and I'm pretty darn sure that that first block I put the first block I installed actually only had 3 of these packing pieces installed, which doesn't mean a great deal because, as I say, this is not entirely retail product at the second, but when you sort of see remove 4 spacers and you can only find 3, it's the sort of thing that makes you just go real slow and leads to an awful lot of what the hecking, which isn't really great for video. Well, it might be great for video, it's not great for my blooming heartbeat. So for the moment, the block. So we take off the SLI cover, which is retained by a bit of sticky tape, as I discovered with the first one, but they don't spell that out. There we are, you can see it there. So when it first comes away, it feels like you're breaking something, but you're not. That's to reveal the SLI connector. You can, in addition, if you wish, remove various bits of the edging. If you want to change it for a different color, you can pull off this bottom strip here and then remove the RGB strip. It's not RGB apparently, it's apparently just LED illumination. You can replace it with a different color strip. They make reference to the fact it's stuck in place, which sounds to me like a fairly experience. However, I'm not touching that, I'm going to leave it as is. So that there is the block ready to go. That is the backplate with 4 fasteners. That is the SLI cover. In here we've got a whole bunch of accessories and such like. And what we have in essence is 2 packs of thermal pads, mostly cut to size. These are the thinner pads. They go on the memory and GPU side of things. These are going on the back of the card behind the backplate. They cover the voltage regulating kit. We've got some thermal compound and more screws. We've got an alternate manifold. So if you don't want to have your unions going up, down, now you've got in and out are clearly marked. So you can pick 2, as you can see they're through holes, and you get 2 blanking plugs. Opens the bag. Right. You've got 2 blanking plugs in this bag here, along with a little sort of tool for inserting them. Or alternatively, you can switch out that manifold for this alternate type, which will then go like so, and your unions will come off the edge. If you're doing a single graphics card, that would probably make sense, but it depends. I mean, you might want flow to go boof, boof, and through essentially, but it gives you the choice. I'm not intending to use that. For the moment, let me arbitrarily run the 2 blanks into place. Try not cross the threads or anything terrible. The only reason I'm putting these plugs in place is, because I don't actually know at the moment which unions I'll be using, is obviously I have to have 2 unions on the block, in and out. If by some awful chance I connect those up and forget to put the blanks in place, then we'll just have coolant absolutely everywhere. If I choose to put a union instead there, if I've got half an ounce of common sense, I'm going to take the blank out and I'll put it in the other side or something such. So there we go. It's really just in case I do something terrible and catastrophic actually. Right, and that's the end of the accessories. So next thing is to strip down the donor card. Right, this is a relatively generic experience. If you've ever played with the GTX graphics card before, this will be vaguely familiar to you. However, with the eVGA, you have to remove the end plate. Generally, you leave the end plate installed along the bottom and you remove a couple of screws that secure the heatsink. In this case, I found with the first sample that the bracket in this particular instance, all right, where's that gone? Well, that's good going, isn't it? Right, there's a screw in there. That's interesting. I think it's stainless. There we go. Got that out. Mildly nasty moment. Where was I? Oh yeah, before I managed to do that. The end plate, the I/O, you can see that lip folds around and it then sits on top of the heatsink. So you have to release this bracket in order that the heatsink will be able to come away. To do that, you take out, see if I can get this one more neatly. So out with the DVI, nuts I suppose. Small Phillips, out with the 3 mini screws. Out with the port blanks. And that should now come away. Oh, there's still one fastener left. Okay, we'll come to it. It's because I did it in a different sequence before I removed that bracket last. Okay. So we take off the back plate. And we need a smaller screwdriver. That is a number 2. So that screwdriver there, although it's physically small, is this, hang on. That's a number 1, that's a number 2. That is a number 0. So number 1 is too large, number 0 is what we want. Take off the back plate. If your graphics card has a backplate, you'll have to do something like this, but the precise details are likely to vary. So follow the principle, but not the exact approach. And there should be one screw under there. There we go. That's got all the screws off with the backplate. Proceed with caution. Okay, what's going on there? I'm sure I've got them all. I have got them all, just held on by the thermal pads. You can sort of hear the fear in my voice, can't you? Right, so that reveals part of the back. Put those screws on the back plates, we know where they came from. Still with the number 0 driver. Remove all the other small screws. Alright, that's the one that's got a nut on it, and that's the one that's retaining the bracket. I think that's a 4mm. Let's find out. Access basically hidden. Right, bit crude pair of pliers time. Just hold the nut those out. Put the nut back on the screw just for neatness. Right, that's all the small screws removed, so now we have the 4 that retain the GPU and the cooler. We should be able to pop off that back plate now. Oh god, one more screw. Fatal, fatal, fatal. Right, let's try that as it flies up and hits me in the face. Right, so that's the other back plate. Put all those fasteners. And now the cooler is retained just by those 4 screws there. We can use a number 1 driver. And now we have the fun that we have 2 electrical connectors under the heatsink. One is for the light bar, one is fan control, one's on either, you get one on each side. And we have to work out which one has the most slack. I think it's that one there. We can see a coil of wire. On this side we've got just a tight wire, so we flip it that away like we're opening a book. And all being well, if I just use my spudger in there, if there is anyone who doesn't feel the least bit concerned when they're doing this, then, well, they're either brave or stupid. A piece of thermal compound is just holding us together. Now we want to, okay, looks like we're going to have to flip that connector out. I thought it would go the other way. Okay, that's the one. What's going on that side? Oh, I see. It's like a sort of a tangle of wires that's nice. Kind of got knotted, not passing through neatly. Okay, and then we just help that out. It should just lift. Okay, And then that connector comes out, and here we have the stock heat sink. Some of the thermal pads have remained with the stock heatsink and some are on the board. Let's transfer over all the bits and pieces before we go any further, because we're not using any of the stock thermal material. Mirror image, of course, so we put that up there. I don't expect to reuse those stock pads particularly. I mean, if I re-air cool this graphics card, put it back to stock, I may use aftermarket, not sure. The point is I want to make sure all those parts are in approximately the correct position and that I know what is what. Having said that, it's quite easy. eVGA uses this pale green material and the Alphacool stuff is this dark grey, so not going to confuse the two. Anyway, just to, in case you haven't seen inside a graphics card before, it's worth pointing out that when you pay £800 odd for a GTX 1080 Ti, what you generally see is a whole lot of that. And eVGA obviously works on the fans and the cooler design and so on and so forth. And of course, most of the money has actually gone on that, which is the, the expensive chips, but also the PCB design and of course the GPU. So of your £800, probably up to £100 is the cooler. Most of it is out of sight. And of course, if you strip down all these different graphics cards from different manufacturers, they look pretty much the same. Worth pointing out that that is because it's an 11GB card. That's obviously the 12th space. Let's just use some alcohol to clean off the thermal material. And let's just clean off the stock cooler as well. Just because we're here. And whatever happens to this cooler in the future, there's no way that that material is going to be reused, plus it's somewhat messy. And there you go, a lovely shiny GP102 GPU at huge expense. Okay, the next stage of putting on the shiny new Alphacool block is to lay on the thermal pads. For reasons I don't quite understand, Alphacool says to put the thermal material on the GPU first and then to do the thermal pads on the front side components. No reason why you shouldn't, I guess, except you're more likely surely to get some dust or some other muck on the GPU if you go that way around. In fairness to Alphacool, it is obviously critical that you remember to put the thermal compound on the GPU, so perhaps it's just their way of saying, you know, whatever else you might cock up today, as long as you put thermal compound on, you've got a decent chance you won't actually burn out your graphics card. Nonetheless, let's put the tube of thermal compound absolutely in front of us. Right there. And then let's do the thermal pads. So we're starting with the thinner pads, which are the 1.5 mils. They're cut to size, and you've got one for each of the memory chips, which has a protective piece of plastic on either side. And they simply sit on each of the chips. Now we've got 12 pads, 11 chips. As with the stock cooler, we had 12 pads in place, even though that is redundant. I guess it's partly to support the cooler, and also I suppose there might be some heat transfer properties, but it does seem fairly daft. But anyway, let's just follow the form. Bits of protective plastic, just stick static. We do not want spare bits of plastic in the works, not no way, not no how. I'm sure the idea of the protective plastic is that you peel off the one side, lay down the material, and when it's in place you peel off the second. It just never seems to work for me. It just seems to pull the pad back off. They don't really stick. So I peel off both protective bits of plastic and then lay down the pad. And 12. Right. Now we have these larger pads. We get a spare 13th pad. The larger pads have to go according to the cut guide. Oh, that's interesting. The larger pads go here and they go outboard of those components and inboard of these. So basically just a broad strip like that, which is that part there. So we take a sharp pair of scissors, we eye it up, and we go cut. check it looks okay. And I note there's also a cut guide that covers that teeny little chip there. So let's just do that. And again. And finally, right, that's the thermal pads on this side in place. Now we need to put on the thermal compound on the GPU. Not sure what brand it is, it's just Alphacool branded. In the past, I'm sure I've had Thermal Grizzly supplied with certain of Alphacool's products, but hey ho. And we'll go for a cross pattern. This is not electrically conductive. It's not like a liquid metal where if you get it in the wrong place you'll get a short. You want to avoid, you know, horrible great lakes of the stuff, obviously, because that just, you know, could get quite foul. But what we want is coverage, and when that block goes down, that's going to cover. And then we turn the page and we peel off the protective plastic from the GPU contact point. We give it a quick clean. No horrible marks or anything nasty going on. No nasty surprises. Doesn't look out of flat. Not that I'd expect it to. But if there was some shock, it's best to catch it at this point. And then we lay the block on the graphics card. Now this is where we're probably best off using the box as a kind of rest. And I want to put the graphics card on there and then lay the block on it, because if I flip the graphics card the pads will fall off. Ideal world, I'd have the block down and I'd lay the graphics card on it so I can align the holes more easily. In practice that is awkward to do, and we put right, so that thread is going to be in line with that. Those four are around the corners of the GPU. that is going to be here. It's just to give me some sort of indication of where the heck I'm aiming for. Fractionally out, but only fractionally. Prepared to slide that when it's a fraction of a hole out. When you're looking at, you know, if it's a couple of mil out, then you need to pull the block off, and otherwise you squidge everything out of sight. Right, let's get 4 screws, 5 screws, 6 screws, 7 screws going in the back. So we've got there, bag of fasteners, somewhere under here. There are the 4 screws that were retaining the backplate in the first instance. So 2 types of screws. We've got short cap heads and we've got longer Phillips heads with a long slot in them. No washers or any such, so we simply put in cap heads, put them in fractionally because we're going to need to just straighten this up just a tad. It needs to be as bang on as we can get it. So that's the 4 in the corner. That one there. And that one there in the midpoint. This stage in the game I could probably put the bracket back on. Right, so and the 7th of these cap heads drops through and has a nut on the back. Make sure that goes okay. Nut's a little bit fiddly. That goes under there, held with a fingertip, hopefully. Right, those cap heads are just about touching. And then what I found with the first graphics card was the smart move now is just to run in the other screws, temporarily ones that are going to hold the back plate, just to make sure that they also align. Because I found you could get the graphics block mounted on the card successfully, but the remainder of the threads are all slightly out. Remember, putting the back plate on took a second and a third go. Looked like that was the easy part of the operation. That's the one. Right. I think it's just the 4 screws for the back plate, which is, I don't know why they were retained by 4 in the first instance. Yeah, you see that there? It's tipping. Let's try doing that one first. Right, now that one's happy, and I think the opposite diagonal, that's now pulled in slightly. Okay, well now I'm actually looking for it. This, you see, now that is now tipping. So basically there's no leeway. That's what it boils down to. Okay, so I'm going to have more fun and games when it comes to putting the back plate on. Forewarned is forearmed. Hold the nut with a pair of pliers because there's no access to get in there with a tiny spanner or anything. And then we do up the 4 GPU screws. Snug down the other 2. Check this one's still tight. Yeah, that's fine. We want the block to contact the GPU. We do not want the GPU to be damaged. Statement of the obvious. Paranoia is the only way. Okay. So now we have the block installed like so. And we need to put on the back plate. For the back plate, it's the same as doing the front essentially, except we're now using the 3mm pads, but the same principle. On the back of the memory chips and the back of the GPU and the back of the voltage hardware, we put on a whole bunch of chunky pads. So it's chunky pads on the back time. These things really do not stick in place, they just rest. Some of these protective bits of plastic have already come off, or were never there, or who knows, which means you end up double checking for a non-existent thing. Only slightly frustrating. Right, that's the 12 pads going on the back of the memory. These are the chunky pads which go in that area, outboard of these components, inboard of the mounting holes, so in that area there, which, what's the limit? Alright, starts over. Right, so we're going down the line of this thermal pad inbound of these surface mount components and inside that. Looks good. Off with the protective plastic. And we go all the way down to where it says thermal pad 1 there. And in addition, we've got a couple of other little bits and pieces on the cut list. So we've got the back of the GPU. So we'll use the spare or 13th memory chip pad. It is big enough. Very often you cover the entire back, but that seems fairly clear. And we'll take a piece of this and we're covering that chip there. Plastic, static. And also tiny little chip there. It just occurred to me, I'm not actually clear whether these protective bits of plastic really show up particularly on camera. I imagine they do. The 4K is horribly revealing, but if I'm doing all this, flicking bits of plastic off my fingers and you can't see them, I would look slightly mental. Right, and now we're ready to mount the backplate. In principle, the backplate simply drops on and is tightened on 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. What I found with the first of the graphics cards was that the 2 corners appeared to be tight. So let's see if I can do it this time with slightly less grief. Also, it's like a sandwich. These edges go into this channel here. And then as the screws tighten down, it kind of gets drawn together. Which isn't a bad idea, but it does mean you do get a little bit of kind of creaking and groaning as the cover moves into position, which at first was a tad disconcerting. These screws, they've got a plain slot across, however they also are a Phillips type. Now, will this fourth one go in cleanly? That's the big question. This back plate is holding all of those thermal pads in position, and there's quite a lot of them. So, as I found with the first graphics card, you don't want to tip it around while you're installing it, otherwise pads can move. And provided the 4 threads and the 4 screws are lined up, it ought to be okay. But it all feels a little tighter than ideal. However, this feels like it's going okay. Okay, that feels like it's worked. I'm not mad keen on the construction. If you look, you can see it's sort of, it's bowed. Because you're squishing down on those 4 points and you're kind of pulling all the pads into position, and if you don't go far enough, then the pads, I mean particularly along the back of the GPU, will be loose and floating, potentially dropping out of place. But how far do you crank the screws down? I mean, if you go, that's pretty much all the way. It just kind of feels wrong to make the cover do that. It might be mechanically absolutely fine. It doesn't look cosmetically bad. There's a part of me that wants to slacken those screws off and let these edges level off, but I'm not at all sure I should do that. I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to be interested to see how it performs. So there we go anyway. That's my second GTX 1080 Ti eVGA card, now with the new Alphacool block installed. I've got access to the SLI connectors, got access to the power connectors, RGB, the lighting connector anyway, comes out there, and that is looking promising. I'm going to install the graphics cards just so I can see where they go, hook up the power connectors just to make sure there's no problem. I cannot see there will be. And then the next thing is to figure out the order of the loops, and then I can take it from there. So let's take one of the 1080 Ti's. If we go for the top slot, once again with this 1000D case, it's a conventional case. There's nothing sort of particularly clever about it. It's just big. So the thumb screws there are behind that lip, which once you got them loose is no problem. But I don't know quite. There's just a part of me wants it to be slightly more special. When I put, okay, so that is the latch for this graphics card. This is one of these slightly annoying things. When the card is installed, to remove it, I'm going to have to, hang on, where's that? Right, that's this RGB connector. I'm going to have to use some sort of extension to connect it to the motherboard. I mean, that's a male pin. That's a male pin. I'm going to need a female cable. Not sure quite what's going on there, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay, is that backplate fouling the I/O shield? Okay, that screw on the backplate is fouling on that chamfered part there. It's always good stuff, isn't it? Okay, let's go down to the next. I've got 4 graphics slots I can work with. I really don't want a graphics card on the bottom because I'm overlapping the I/O headers and connectors. Certainly want to be sticking with these 2 here. Let's face it, if you've got the choice of using the primary, you use the primary. In this instance, I guess not. In my previous PC, was using an eVGA X99 micro ATX motherboard with a Core i7, and with that you get a kind of add-in shroud which goes around the I/O, secures with a screw there and a screw there, and that cover was incompatible with my water loop or my case. I forget which it was, but it was just couldn't go. The screws physically would not go. Looked like it should, and it was just out. Right, let's try that there. Okay, well, as you'd expect, that just goes in just like I thought the top one would. So it is this screw and that chamfered part there. Okay, that's not great. Okay, there's no way on God's green earth that I'm not taking this graphics card out again during this, but just for the moment, let's put it in anyway. In the correct position. And we'll just check everything in its true position. Right, so 6 and 8. That USB 3.1 Type C there, maybe I want to put that up a tad. Feed the power below it, feed that up. Okay, which means that the second card is going below. I'm now very much hoping that when I come to fire this up, that in addition to all the other usual concerns about everything working, that I don't have some sort of interference between the M.2 SSD and the PCI Express slots, as I'm using different slots to those that I was expecting to be using. But we'll see how that one goes. Right, let's take that RGB connector along there. Really don't know what the plan is with that. Take that one along there. I'm going to bring you around a bit because basically you're getting a lousy view. I hope that's a bit better. Out of curiosity, does my eVGA SLI bridge span there and fit with those back plates? No, it doesn't. It fouls the back plates. Kind of expected that. And let's put the power into this. Yee, gads, that's some rigid cable. You do want to go from above with that. I tell you, those back plates and the way you have to kind of squish on the screws, that back plate does that. That GPU is not sagging, but the back plate is. Oh well, that's a shame. And then we've got the ITX system. I think I'm going to put a turn of tape around those RGB connectors because the thought of them shorting in some way, shape or form, and I cannot imagine how it might be, but right now I'm just looking at these connectors flapping around, or they might scratch something. Don't like that idea. Also, it makes it slightly easier to see them because black cable hidden among the dark, not so great. Where were we? Oh, right, and then this graphics card. Geez, does that actually go? Oh my God, that's close. Okay, so this is going to be... This is what happens when you move these graphics cards down unexpectedly. Unless I do something to that shroud, it's going to be liquid, liquid, in, out, out. I think we're going to be going in, out, out, leaving the bottom blanked, and away. I think that's just got to be. Wow. Okay, 2 thumb screws go there, power goes there, single 8 pin. That's the latch, that's all doable. That obviously crosses pretty much over that, but there is actually some clearance. Let me just bring you in so you can have a look. Not talking a lot, but there is clearance, which is a lot better than having no clearance. So this huge great case, and in this instance we come down to that tiny little clearance there. Clearly I'm gonna have to go bop, bop, cross and up. Blank off the lower, take that out, put it in the bottom, that's obvious. Okay, what have I learned about the order of the loop? Tight for space, such a shame at the moment the graphics cards are in these 2 slots and not raised one up. I'm gonna have to take a good close look at that panel there because I don't have the option of just losing that screw, and if it really is just like a screw head that's not clearing well, that's as frustrating can be. Not happy. On the other hand, the Asus motherboard is about £700 worth, so bolting a hole in the IO shield might be a tad rude. Right, That radiator there, the right hand side as you stand in front of the PC, the left hand side as I'm looking through it, or the back as I choose to think of it, that rad, that reservoir, that pump are going to the Core i9 along with this pair of graphics cards. I may yet switch from separate pump res to a combined unit. It doesn't actually change a great deal, it just means you don't have a connection between the two. And it means obviously it all closes together, but in the great scheme of things it doesn't make a fundamental difference as far as I can see. With the main system, so I have to go in there and then straight through and then out. To go in there, I'm going to be surely coming out of the CPU block, so out of there, which means I have to go in there to go in there. I guess I could be coming off the pump, so pump to in, what, along there perhaps, and in, and then out. And that's, I don't like the crossing over thing, I really don't. Anywho, yeah, so in, out, through, away, then away is what? Back to the radiator. I mean, this is the thing, if the rad was the other way up and the unions are down the bottom, I'd be going from there to there, which is just horrible. Were I going to a radiator at the back, cross flow, and then out the top, and a radiator there and cross flow and out, I mean, yeah, that would work, but that would be 3 radiators to kind of go around the case, which is not impossible, but awful lot of hardware essentially just to kind of be the equivalent of a run of tubing. Anyway, and then from the rad to the res, from the res to the pump. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of distance. This is sort of more linear. So radiator res, pump, CPU out, GPU back to radiator. Again, were this inverted, it would be easier to get to that point there, but then you've got to get from that point there. I mean, it's a big case, and it's not really assisting the liquid cooling one little bit. Still, perhaps inspiration will strike. That configuration of graphics cards looked like the 2 loops were going to be really hard work. So once again, I've changed my mind. Come in closer, take a better look. What I've done is to install the alternate manifold, so the 2 unions go there rather than having to go vertically, which means that you take the graphics card like so, or more accurately like so. You get a pry tool of some sort. I'm using this. You get in there more sticky tape, which seems to be Alphacool's favourite way of securing things with this block. You pry it out. Actually, I'm doing them a disservice. There's no sticky tape at this point. That's just popped in place. You remove those 3 screws. Unfortunately, you also have to take off the back plate because it's sandwiching this manifold like so. And with the 3 screws removed and the back plate off, you can then pull off that manifold and fit the alternate manifold. Thus, makes perfect sense. You naturally have to also replace the 2 O-rings that go, but get the O-rings out. They're teeny little things. I mean, they're thin, they're not tiny, but they're thin. So here we have the O-rings that go, although they are round, they actually go into that oval recess there on the 2 ports, like thus. And that's what seals the manifold to the graphics block, and that in turn means you don't get fluid squirting out the sides. So you have to be a bit careful, but it's not exactly a difficult job. It's just one of those things where you have to take time. It is, of course, essential to do some leak testing when you replace a part like that, which is why I rigged up this little DDC pump along with a power supply, which I used a standard jumper so I could use it to power the Molex power, without actually having a PC connected to the power supply. You use those sorts of jumpers typically when you're just running a pump. So in this instance, I'm doing it before I actually have built the loop. And the other thing I found was, by careful observation, is that I can just get that screw head in past that I/O shield. So the graphics card does go in the top. It's really, really close, but it's looking promising. The idea, in case it's not obvious, is that with the two GTX 1080 Ti's raised up the main motherboard in the way I'd originally planned, that gives me more space around the Mini ITX system and the GTX 1080, which is vertically mounted. Bit of separation should give me an extra yay much, and that's going to make all the difference in the world, I hope. Should also mean you can actually see the Mini ITX system. It was in danger of being completely covered by the 1080 on the horizontal, and the 1080 Ti rather on the horizontal, and the 1080 on the vertical, and that would have been a bit peculiar. So this is what, one step back, but two, maybe three steps forward. Hurrah! It's time for plan either C or D. I'm losing track now. Okay, first and foremost, the secondary graphics card is now installed with the change of unions, so I've got a reasonably straight run around here with tubing. That should be okay, fingers crossed. My original plan of using separate reservoirs and pumps, it's a dead loss. It might have looked like a silly thing to do in the first place. The logic, such as there is that this case is incredibly tall. 480mm radiators, you've got to do something with the height. I've already got this cavernous space here, so I thought, well, if I put the reses up there, then I've got loads of space there, so if I put the pumps down there, but not so clever. So I've got myself a pair of EKWB pump res units, which basically are the same unit in one. So the hardware hasn't changed in any way, shape or form, except I don't have to link the res to the pump. But I'm going to whip out these reservoir pumps, and I'm going to mount these two units pretty much in the same place. So one at the back there and one there, which means that I'll jiggle with the heights so they don't overlap each other. I don't want to create further problems after all, but the idea here is to attempt to just sort out the runs, my order, my loops and so on. I've got clear in my head now, so I'm going to put that hardware in, and then I'm going to get on and do some tubing. Keep forgetting what a big stretch it is around this case. On the subject of the reservoirs, I had thought these are 140s, which refers to the height of the reservoir, and you can get them up to, I think, 250. So I could have very easily gone for taller reses, which would have given me that vertical height. I'm fairly confident that that would have then meant that one overlapped the other, and I really didn't want that grief. So haven't done that. It's worth pointing out while I'm just fiddling these out that, in a sense, what you're seeing here is my first, second, third, fourth thoughts. Ordinarily, of course, what we do in these sorts of videos, and I'm doing a case review or some such, is we edit all this stuff out. The idea of this is not to show that I'm an indecisive person that hasn't got a clue what he's doing, although, frankly, I'll let you be the judge of that. It's that I'm changing my mind as I go, but you're actually seeing the process. Some of the case reviews I do are relatively straightforward, but you still have to kind of move things around and decide what you're going to do. In this instance, there are so many options that, yeah, I've lost my way a few times and I've come back and you go down a different track. Hopefully the idea is I don't actually make any comprehensive mistakes. Get that pump out of the way. One reservation I have about the change of pump reservoir is that, as mentioned before, these are varios. So you set the speed of the pump, plug in the power, it works. These are PWMs, and I've generally tried to avoid PWMs. So exactly as you'd expect, so you've got the Molex power there, and there you have two connections, one for the PWM and one for the taco. So you plug that into your CPU or whatever connection, water pump connection in your motherboard, and it's telling you what the RPM is, but it also triggers it on the PWM. So you can control it in the BIOS. It's much more sophisticated in that sense. It's better, so you can have the thing kick off at a decent speed and then ramp up if you want, or even slow down, depends what you want to do, like variable fan curve. Trouble is, you need a running PC. I'm not aware of a way of jumping PWM. If there is a way, please let me know. So that means that whereas I can jump one of the others and I can get the loop running, with this, as far as I'm aware, I need a running PC for the PWM connection. I hope I'm wrong, just because, but well, we shall see. Right, that is literally just put in place to see where approximately that goes. So that's my Core i9 system. Core i9, pump res goes to bottom GPU. So I'm outputting, I'm going to there. Probably want that lower. Let's get this off in the meanwhile. Okay, so I'm going to need a bracket to mount that to the radiator, and I need to decide where it's going to go. This is going, pump res feeds to CPU there. I want this one relatively low. Which I think it's going to be there, can't go down below, so that is the lowest we're going to go. So let's put the bracket on the pump. Okay, let's just pop this out to give me access to the other two screws. And now the second pump unit. Okay, so this is going out to GPU bottom. This is going out to the GPU bottom, out there. Which actually means I want it as low as possible. And it can scoot straight under. Okay, right. Seems straightforward. They do like the lurid wiring, don't they? Good Lord. Right, there we go. Time to connect it all together. For tubing, I'm using this Alphacool hard tube, which is 1310mm, 13mm OD, 10mm ID. I believe it's PTG. Fairly sure it is. They now list actually a number of different hard tubes. The important thing when you're using tubing, whether it's soft or hard, is to make sure it's compatible with your fittings. That matters. Principle's dead straightforward, isn't it always? So in principle, you take a bunch of these unions, which are a G-quarter at the threaded end. They disassemble like so. That's got an O-ring on it to seal it to whatever the pump, the radiator, or whatever. That collar there has got a conical seal and another O-ring inside. You slide that up the tube, make sure the O-ring goes up as well without damaging it. Ideally lubricate it all rather than being a complete animal. Slide it into the fitting, make sure it's nice and square, and then you snug down the collar and it locks in place and it's sealed and it's all jubbly. That of course is but one tiny part of the equation. You've also got to bend the tubes to shape, and you probably need a whole bunch of other fittings, 90 degrees, double 45s and such like, so you can line everything up. If you're some sort of wizard, you can end up with this sort of multi-dimensional bending and so on and so forth, which is all jolly clever, terribly hard work, and you make one small mistake and you're toast. This here is Alphacool's Ice Coffer, which is their hard tube bending kit. It is frankly ludicrously extreme. It contains all manner of stuff that if you plan simple runs of tube, you basically don't need. That is a base plate. You've got some mandrels, different sizes, which have different, so that's marked 45, 90, 60 outside, 30 outside. You clamp that down to your watts, you heat your tube up, you bend it round, you bend it in different directions. Here you've got different you can clamp those, and so on and so on and so on. It is far too complicated, far too over the top. It's for basically creating liquid cooling works of art. I do not intend to use but any of that. I'm going to use these bits and pieces from it. So there we have various fasteners, so you can clamp some of these forming blocks to the base plate should I choose. I've got that cutting block there. It has it accommodates 2 sides of the tube, so that's the 13 there, and that I guess is 16. You put it in there, you take their little saw, you cut it through the slot. The tube comes out, it's then got a jagged rough end, which if you pushed it into an O-ring would just rip the O-ring to shreds. So you need to use one of these deburring tools. That is for deburring the inside, that for deburring the outside. That makes it slightly less jagged, but it's not ideal. You then need something like a Scotch-Brite pad or some such to finally smooth it all off. Then you find out whether or not you've actually got the thing to the correct length, and you keep on going. So this is going to be a whole series of me working out the various little bits and pieces of the 2 loops, probably a lot of cursing and tutting and going back over my steps, and it's actually hacking with raining. We've got some amazing weather going on here in the UK at the moment. One other thing you definitely need is, well, 2 things. In order to bend the tubing, you use a heat gun. This is an Alphacool branded, O-Cool branded heat gun pro. It's the sort of thing you use for stripping paint, except you want to make sure you can rest it like so, and in this case it's got 3 heat settings. I've used this a few times and it seems to be basically number 2, depending on the tubing, might be okay. Number 3 is fiercely hot. And here we have some silicon mandrels, and I guess that smaller one, yep. So that smaller one, you basically wet that in soapy water, slide it up the tube, heat, 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 bend. If you don't have the mandrel in, it just kind of kinks and is useless. Perhaps the most aggravating thing, and there's an awful lot of aggravating things about hard tubing, perhaps the most aggravating thing about hard tubing is that when you want to mark the point at which you wish to do a bend, if you use pencil, the pencil mark will be on there forever. I'm not quite sure what you should use to mark the tube at the point at which you wish to bend. If someone has a bright idea, I'm all ears. It's a simple question. Not quite sure what the answer is. Right, I'm going to get on. I'm going to size up some of my tubes. Let's have a quick rundown of the various bits of hardware. So that is a compression fitting, comes apart like so. G-quarter thread, 8mm Allen key, screws into your water pump, reservoir, CPU block, GPU block, whatever. Sealed with an O-ring. You slide this collar along the there like so, 13mm hard tubing, slide it back up. That's got another O-ring inside with a spacer behind it. Just tap that out. Always the way, when you want the thing to come out to play, it doesn't want to, and when you want it to stay in place, there we go. So behind it there is a conical seal. Basically it's a Belleville washer, and O-ring goes there, and then you slide it down the tube, and as you lock it up, the O-ring squidges slightly, and that holds the tube in place. So that's the straightforward part. Those are £7.50 a piece. We've got one of these 90-degree male-females that rotates. That's compatible with any liquid cooling hardware, so you simply put that into your CPU block or whatever to change direction, and then you obviously have to put something into that, such as, for example, one of these unions or another piece of hardware. Here we those are £6.40. Here we have something at £8.60. That's an L connector, 90-degree, but the point is it's got a compression fitting either side. So same deal as with that. You plug back off the collar, plug in the tube, lock down the collar, and you're joining 2 tubes together. Obviously the alternative is to bend the tube through 90. That's a 45-degree rotating fitting. That's a double 45, therefore it can be a 90. or if you chose to kind of take it off in some wacky angle or use it as an extension or whatever. There we go, the 45, and the 45 is £8.56, the double 45, the 90 is £10.20. We've got those fittings obviously are compatible with, again, with any liquid cooling hardware, standard G-quarter threads. That's a female G-quarters, so you can see there, if you put in 2 compression fittings, you've essentially got the same thing. That £96.42. Drain valves, good things to use if you possibly can, saves an awful lot of aggravation, 17 quid. Various extensions, probably 10 and 20 mil, but literally to space your fittings and get things in line. They're about £3 a piece. And then you get into the more exotic stuff. So that's a Y connector, that's just under 7 quid. And that's a 5-way, and that's just under 7. And that's when you're in the realms of desperately attempting to hook things together. You might end up transferring a blanking cap, for example, to there, in which case, apart from that, it looks as ugly as sin, but then you've basically got an extended 45-degree. So that's the kind of thing that's, oh dear Lord, I'm in trouble, what can I do, sort of thing. Hope not to have to use any of these. Don't really want to use any spacers, but whatever works, that's the thing. So there we go, a whole range of hardware, and they range from £6.50 to £8–9 for the main bits and pieces. Most expensive common fitting, 10–20, and then the drain valve, 17 quid. So you can easily get through 100 to maybe £200 in fittings for a single regular loop without doing anything too exotic. I nearly forgot, when you're working with a heat gun, you're working with hot materials, gloves are a good idea as well. And I'm sure this is just stating the crash in the obvious, but heat can equal melted things or fire. You don't want to make it yourself, you don't want to damage your PC, you don't want to damage your working environment, you need a bit of space. Proceed with caution, that's my watchword. I'm going to start with the more inaccessible stuff. So I'm connecting between that radiator point there and that CPU block point there, because once I've got other things in front of it, it'll be more inaccessible. So the idea at the moment is to simply go up and along in bop, bop, bop. Should be straightforward enough. If I put that 90-degree union in the CPU block, pointing straight up, take one of the Alphacool fittings there, which is going to receive the tube, run that into place there. There's that fitting there, which is a 90 with, it's already got the ends to receive a tube directly. I don't have to put another fitting into it. If that is there, then we can have a straight run from that point directly to there, and then we simply have to connect that to there. That's the idea. This is just a length of plain tube, so measure it, put some masking tape around it, mark the cut point, put it in the cutting block, sort of thing. It's probably a lot easier with a parting off wheel, but this should be competent enough. Remove the piece of masking tape. Not too bad actually. And just twiddle in the deburrer. Feel for horrible roughness. Deburr the inside just to be on the safe side. Doesn't feel too bad. Obviously with the Scotch-Brite, you want to just be working on, with the Scotch-Brite you want to be working just on the end, because where you're using abrasive, it's bound to be a little bit marked, and that's going to vanish inside the fitting. And then we just need to clean out the oog and muck. Obviously there's a bit of sag on that horizontal tube at the moment, so if we hold that up level, that's a piece of aluminium welding rod. That is my former, so I need to cut that so that's the correct length. I mean, obviously I can see the side, you're seeing it straight on, so you can't see the angle of dangle. Get that to the correct length, cut a piece of tube, bend. Next stage should be plain sailing. Right, That's actually 4 fittings, so 2 90s male female, 2 compression fittings, and then a very short piece of tube, so it's all together as one assembly and acts as a bridge from that output out to that input. I don't think Alphacool actually has a kind of a manifold that links graphics cards, or if it does I haven't seen it. Would have made my life rather easier. Let's just work this into place. Because the 90s are swivel fittings, I'm able to rotate the G-quarter threads into place while the body remains still. And as these manifolds are plastic, you need to be double extra special careful. Got a double 45 coming out of the graphic, the flow being from pump res along into GPU, across GPU, out of GPU, into CPU. It's going that away. So we've got one double 45 there, add a second double 45 there. Obviously that's effectively a 90 plus a 90 equals a 180, which means we're now pointing in the proximate direction, and I think I now want, can you tell I'm making this up as I go? Let's try this, another double 45. And can I align those so they point at each other, which is after all the object of the exercise? And I think I can. And then I need to put a compression fitting in each end. Which I shall nip up with an Allen key in just a second. Whoa. Yep, I think that looks like it aligns to me. So 3 double 45s, 2 compression fittings, and then a short length of tube to connect. Making sure there's no nasty sharp edges to damage my O-rings. Okay, so coolant comes in there. Flows through, goes out to there, so need to connect that rad point to that in. You can't see what I'm pointing at. You need to connect that radiator point to the in on the res pump there, and then the out along and up to the graphics in, and then we have a loop. To connect the radiator to the inlet of the pump reservoir unit here, I've used a whole bunch of fittings. So up top I've got a compression fitting, a very short length of tubing, and then a double compression fitting 90. So basically I've got a tube going down. Here I've got a whole bunch of things. I've got, let's just swing this slightly more into view. Take it around there. You can kind of see it through there. I've got a 45, a 45, a double 45, short length of tubing, and then a double compression fitting. Essentially a snake of metal, and the object of the exercise is to end up with a vertical compression fitting here. And then length of aluminium rod as a guide to the length of my tube, and I want my tube, I think, to be that long overall. And in addition, you need 5mm either end to go into the fitting. So that plus 10mm vertical straight piece of tube, all being well. So here's my tube cut to length, and there are the two end fittings, both in place. Because it's a 90 both ends, it's the same type of fitting. Although I'm fairly sure they're interchangeable, these collars, but best not to find out the hard way. Slide that into place down the bottom. Oh, moisten it, probably a good idea. Interesting, doesn't seem like getting the O-ring. Okay, that's seated. Slide the collar up. Feels locked into place. Tube feels secure. As I say, it's a python of fittings down there, and then we want to slide this up here. Slide up this collar, which obviously dropped all the way down. And that's looking okay. In principle, connecting the pump to the graphics card, flowing that way, then up and around, would be really straightforward, because you go along, up and in, allowing for the power. If you want to come a bit closer, then so be it. But essentially horizontal and bop, no problem at all. The obvious problem here being, however, got the second system, Mini ITX, and this graphics card, so I'm going to have to make a compromise. Were it as simple as that, well, I'll be happy, but it's not. Because the Mini ITX there, graphics card is going to be there, and to connect from the CPU block and out here and to the GPU block, frankly, is going to be a pain in the backside, no two ways about it. But I'm going to have to come across here, which would cross that line. So the compromise I'm making, it's not ideal, but it should work tolerably well, is I've got basically this piece of tube here, I mean, I could have gone for one piece and just bent a right angle in it, but this 90 degree is back here, and it is simply to go like thus. And then that lifted out of the way, so it's not horizontal, but it is tucked away and hopefully gives me a certain amount of leeway to work on the Mini ITX system, and it also means, of course, the upper loop is then complete. So not perfect, but there is a reason for it. God, terrible thought. Right, that ought to be the main loop complete. So I'm gonna put Mayhem's Pastel Blue in that reservoir there. Here's my squeezy bottle. Obviously, hoping we don't have any leaks, because, you know, that's not good. And then the next thing is, does it actually work? Now, before I put this system together, I ran the motherboard, memory, and I think one of these graphics cards as a PC, along with the SSD that's on it. So it was a PC, that much I'm confident of. And it has Windows on it, and it has drivers. Since then, I've changed from the cooler I was using to this block. I've liquid cooled the graphics cards. I've plumbed in the cooling. So there's plenty of potential for, you know, problems. I mean, no two ways about it. Primarily, we're concerned about leaks. I've got brand new pump reservoir units that I haven't used before, but I'm trusting they haven't arrived broken. But again, anything is possible. So fingers crossed. Let's just get this ready. And because it's PWM, I'm just going to go for broke, turn it on, and be ready to pull the plug in the event of catastrophe. Because, as I say, anything is possible. You'll note the screen is still dark. I seem to recall the BIOS on this did actually take a turn or two to come to life previously. Okay, we've reached the stage where the reservoir hasn't immediately drained. That's good. Right, let's lift our eyes and just see what's going on. So we have coolant in the bottom, we have clearly something pumping here. Still got a dark screen, which makes me wonder about the graphics card. However, we've got many graphics outputs and we've got two graphics cards. I'm just going to bring you in closer actually so you can see this coolant level rising and falling, which at the moment looks like an airlock. Not surprising. I mean, it'd be a miracle if there wasn't. This is obviously the out from the radiator, and it's not doing anything. So at the moment we have airlock. Right, let's put this cap in the top of the res. Close that down, and let's see about getting a graphics connection. Oh, before I do that, let's just show you the front. Obviously these fans and the back fans are the ones connected to the main system, these are the ones connected to the small system, so that is as intended. That's clearly a default rainbow marquee kind of thing. Right, let's shut this down, do some oh wow! Look at the I/O panel. I've moved the graphics connection to the second graphics card. I've moved the pump PWM connection from the CPU down to the pump connection, which means it runs considerably faster. That's now meant that it's flowing properly, and I've topped up the reservoir. I'm in the BIOS splash screen, so I can just disable the CPU warning, because obviously as there's no connection to the CPU, that upsets the motherboard no end. And we now have one PC. The Corsair connections for all the fans and lights and such like needs to be sorted out. It turns out that Corsair Link does not like a mix of their fans, and the two HD140s ain't the same as LL120s. So that's going to be fun and games. And now the BIOS has been told to ignore the CPU fan speed. It's happy to boot into Windows. There's still a bazillion other things to do, but as I say, it is a PC, so that's good.